yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of talking more about 3D, how we use that Shopify, and just kind of giving some ideas of where we see 3D models being used in e-commerce today, and some of the ideas that we're kind of thinking about of what are some improvements in the kind of 3D ecosystem that we could be looking forward to in tomorrow. And like a lot of these ideas are things that we thought about internally, and that we're starting to participate in open groups to kind of push a lot of these ideas forward. But before we jump into like the 3D context things, I just want to give a kind of brief kind of context setting here for like Shopify and kind of how we're approaching 3D. And just for some background, so Shopify, we're kind of an online SaaS platform that enables like small, medium, large size businesses to really kind of set up a home online for their shop or for their brand. And merchants, they use the platform to manage everything from back office management for inventory, orders, all the way up to creating their online storefronts, where they can showcase all their different branding, their content, and sell their products. And our merchants, they're always looking for really innovative ways to differentiate themselves. Unlike marketplaces, a lot of our merchants are looking for towards that like direct to consumer experience, right? Giving them a place to really express kind of the brand and the story behind their products, and also like the quality that they put behind those products. And when it comes to kind of the online world of selling goods, the primary way that we're seeing merchants today interact with their buyers is through media. And just kind of give like a mental model of kind of how we think about media and how it relates to kind of the merchant experience. We see the merchants having kind of this brand that they want to kind of come across in their online store. And kind of the best tool for communicating that brand is through different parts and different areas like of media. And traditionally, these are things like images, videos. It's very common. You go to a product page and you see like the product photos there, or you might see video or description text. And that's kind of the status quo right now. But what I'm really excited to kind of talk about is what does it mean for 3D to kind of live alongside these different media types? And that's what I really want to focus on today. So, a lot of people here are familiar with the 3D space, but why do we want to talk about 3D in the context of e-commerce? And at the end of the day, it's really about giving buyers more control and more perspective into how their products are being sold, how giving different options for buyers to really interact with what those products look like from any angle they choose, right? I think one of the biggest superpowers for 3D is that unlike static Photoshop, photos of products, buyers can turn around like the stroller, for example, to see the details underneath, to kind of see the inside of a bag. And when you kind of move that into augmented reality, you can then talk about, well, how does this object like fit in a physical space? What are the physical dimensions, like visually in a way? A video can come close to this, right? You can see a product video being made of your favorite product being fit into a car, but it's not your car, right? It's the merchant's video, it's their interpretation of kind of what you want to see. So, the other question then becomes, well, how do we start integrating 3D content with the existing kind of workflows and experience that both buyers and merchants are looking forward to? So this is kind of a sample of like how it kind of works for Shopify merchants today. And kind of starting from the left here, it all kind of wraps around this basic kind of photo gallery idea where, this is very common. You go to a product page, you see a gallery of different photos for the products. And then you might also see different videos for that product as well. And, you can see these all embedded. But what's really great is, you can also see in line that 3D model experience right alongside different images and different videos. And what we've started to see is, for merchants who are starting to add kind of 3D models as that kind of third media type, they're really starting to see some pretty great benefits from it. So a case study that we did with one of our merchants, Rebecca Minkoff, they sell these really great bags. Just to kind of go through some of the numbers here, all right, we've seen shoppers like 44% more likely to actually add an item to their cart after they've seen it or interacted with it in 3D. 27% were more likely to place an order after they interacted with it, and 65% were more likely to actually place that order if they saw it in AR. And from anyone coming from kind of the perspective of a merchant of, oh, what do I need to do to kind of better position my products to really make them sell better? Like, these are really big numbers, right? Like, you're looking at pretty much like a 65% conversion increase if you're able to get your buyers to view it in AR. And I think when you kind of look at these stats, it all kind of comes down to kind of buyer confidence, right? When buyers are able to see the products in the way that they want to see them, or when they want to see how it fits, like in that car example, it just gives them higher confidence that the product that they're getting is exactly what they want. It's going to fit in the place that they want it to fit in. It's going to have the properties that they're looking for, because they have full control over what they want to get out of that product versus just kind of a static series of images or pre-canned videos. So I think there's like a lot of power there in like giving increased confidence to buyers today. And just to kind of give an idea of how like this works from the merchant side. So that was the buyer experience, how a buyer would interact with this. But today, like on Shopify, the way something like this would work is it's really about bringing down the barriers for getting merchants onboarded to using 3D content. And we're trying to make it as easy as possible. Here on the left is just a screenshot of kind of the product page admin experience. So this is where a merchant would go and kind of create their product and their listing. And here you can just drag and drop your 3D model in like GLB or USDZ form. And in that case, it just uploads it and attaches it the same way you do it for images or video. So it's the same workflow. And once that kind of gets processed, it then will get published onto their online storefront. And again, here it just gets published alongside that gallery view that they're already used to. Buyers are already used to kind of viewing things in a gallery with the different images and videos. And last but definitely not least, like you could use that 3D model as well to launch into augmented reality, whether you're using like AR Quick Look on iOS or something like Scene Viewer on Android. Merchants can kind of get this full experience by just having that 3D model. And these are great tools for merchants to really increase kind of their impact on how they can sell their products. But as we all know, things with 3D can be complicated, right? This isn't without a lot of challenges. And I kind of want to talk about the challenges that we've seen in 3D today and kind of dive into a bit more about like kind of what we're seeing. And I think the first challenge is definitely not unknown to people in the 3D space. It's been a problem for a while. And it's really just the diversity of the ecosystem, right? Like 3D models, they come in all like shapes, sizes, formats. And, to be honest, it's a pretty messy and fragmented world. And that's for someone who's, in the know for 3D. Imagine merchants who are trying to sell their products. They don't have any background on 3D at all. They just want to kind of get those benefits. But now they're faced with all these different formats they have to work with. So obviously they're going to kind of lean towards, well, I know how images work. I know how videos work. Let's just use those. So there's lots of kind of to take on there. But I think what's exciting is, we're starting to see the industry start to rally around a few different formats. And I think it's because of this, it's, made 3D commerce, especially on the web, possible. Formats such as like the Kronos Group's GLTF and GLB formats. And even like Apple's USDZ format for enabling AR Quick Look and AR experiences on the iPhone. But there's definitely still a challenge here where you still need a different format based on how your buyer wants to experience your 3D product, right? Your USDZ file is required for showing an AR experience on an iPhone. Your GLB files required for a scene viewer or on the web. So there's still this kind of fork in the road in how, like, what kind of formats you need to support. And there's this other problem too, where some of our larger merchants, they actually already have 3D models made, but they might be part of their production process, right, in their pipelines, where they might be designing their products in AutoCAD or other CAD-based softwares. And there's definitely a huge gap between using models that were created for the purpose of designing products into a real-time experience, and other kind of mezzanine formats, such as USD. Like there's a lot of complications there in trying to transfer that information or data set into the real-time world. So, what's the current solution here? Like right now, the compromise that's been made is we need to be very explicit about, what file formats that we support. And we need to do that because we need to be able to reliably convert or transform whatever models we receive into a format that's, acceptable to all the different ways a buyer wants to experience that product. So we have to be really strict on how we handle that. The next challenge is, again, nothing new to the world of 3D. It's this problem of performance, right? As we all know, like loading, rendering, and interacting with 3D in real time, it's always been a limitation since it's really been around, right? Rendering those things in real time. And it's definitely no different when we're talking about 3D on the web for buyers who, they're not playing a video game or something, right? These are people who are on their web browser and trying to experience this 3D product in the first time. And often it's actually like sometimes the first time a lot of people see 3D models because they're not used to like other types of media when it comes to 3D. And 3D rendering, it's like a heavy operation, right? It requires a lot of resources, both on the network for bandwidth, graphics cards, there's certain system requirements that you need to kind of push this information forward. And that's a lot more challenging than something like showing an image or playing a video. And besides even just being able to render the model, you need to render it at an interactive speed. The frame rates need to be good. You need to reduce the complexity of it. And the question that we always get, especially from merchants, is, well, how do I retain the quality and look of the products that I'm modeling and I want to sell, but also make sure that I'm not bogging down the buyer experience on the storefront, right? I want to be able to show all the qualities that I put into that model. Like if technology allowed it, our merchants would send gigabyte model files to buyers to really kind of showcase all the different qualities they can. But obviously with bandwidth limitations, if you're on an iPhone and loading a gigabyte model, that's a bit much, right? You don't want to blow through your bandwidth. So the solution here is a variety of different optimization solutions, like RapidCompact, and being able to generate different levels of details for your buyers. So you can kind of start tailoring the experience for which buyers are seeing based on what they have available based on bandwidth and kind of the device they use. But even before we consider the performance challenges, the last challenge is you actually need a model. Like for a lot of these merchants, 3D is a whole new concept for them. They don't have either the skills or previous experience with 3D. And as we know, like 3D models are far more complex than something like taking a photo or a video. And sure, like getting professional product photography done can be expensive, right? Getting a studio set up, the lighting and all that. But imagine having to onboard a large merchant who's looking to kind of 3Dify their entire catalog, right? That's a huge problem. And there's a lot of partners out there who handle this well, but it's still an expensive endeavor to kind of onboard all those products, and it's not cheap. And because of this, it's just overall costly to get it. There's these unique skills involved into getting content created. It's not just like Photoshop or something where you can just take a picture with your phone. And what we're seeing is, even if our merchants had these skills, they might not have the time to really focus on getting those models made. It's like they're trying to run a business, they're trying to do so many other things, and the time needed to make those models, it's just another barrier. And the current solution here is a lot of merchants work with modeling partners. And a great example of this here is on the top right here, this great vase from Magnolia Market, one of our merchants. And the process would be like the merchant would take different photos from different angles and then send that off to a modeling partner. And then they would kind of infer the geometry and the texture using their own methods. And that interaction would happen off the platform, and they would be able to receive any models that they wanted to get created. So just to kind of summarize, like the challenges that we're seeing today in kind of the 3D space and e-commerce, there's these limitations on file types, right? Because of the diversity of the 3D content that we want to show and have buyers experience, it's difficult to rely on every format that we receive having what we need to satisfy all those different kind of channels or different experiences, right? Whether it's like AR or on the web. An often thing that people will ask us is, well, what about kind of CAD workflows? Can I submit my CAD model? Well, the problem with CAD models is they don't often have things like textures. that's important information if you wanted to kind of showcase that data on an online storefront, right? You have the geometry and everything, but there's a whole other layer of materials that you need to consider. So we really need to be explicit about kind of what we support and how we handle the files that we receive today. The other kind of major issue is really that constraint on models of interaction, whether it's bandwidth or the complexity of the model, or even just like device limitations, right? If buyers today require like heavy GPUs to do like really large processing on models, that's not really sustainable. We can't expect every merchant on their iPhone to have like the newest device to run those models on. And lastly, right now it's very much kind of the traditional world of 3D content creation, and that you need to kind of get people to either hand model these models right now. And there's like new scanning techniques that I'll talk about later. But there's still that large barrier in both the complexity, the knowledge needed to get those models made, and even like where to start, right? Like, oh, how do I even begin getting a 3D model made? So that was kind of like the state of things today and the challenges that we've seen so far as kind of we've entered this 3D space. But I kind of want to shift into what would be great to see kind of in the tomorrow, in kind of the next like 3-5 year time frame. And I think there's be great ideas that are kind of 3D specific, but definitely around the world of e-commerce that we can see having a lot of value. And I think the first one is, I'm not sure if this is the correct name for it, but this idea of progressive enhancement, right? This isn't a new technique or anything. It's been around for a while in many different forms, but it's really the idea of combining various levels of detail with the context of the model is rendered in real time on a demand way, right? So for example, this is really common in video games where they're using it to optimize kind of their draw call and all their different performance envelope measurements. Where for example, here on the top right, I think this is Halo 4. The Spartan model that's closer to your camera loads in at like a level of detail 1, like super high detail, whereas something that's further away, that might be on a lower resolution, right? Because the eye can't necessarily discern the visual differences between the model that's far away and the model that's up close to you. And I think the ability to kind of switch between different levels of detail, is really important when you think of e-commerce, right? Because if you're on a product page and you want to see that model loaded, you might load it in kind of viewing a little away at a lower level of detail. But what you really want to do is, if you want to zoom in like on the inside of a bag or on kind of the logo or kind of the clasp on that bag, you want to allow the buyer to zoom into that part of that model, but don't lose out any of the detail. And maybe that's something where some sort of progressive loading can happen, where you're kind of streaming in higher qualities of detail in kind of that patch of the model. And right now, the way it's going to work is we can only really serve a single or so many levels of detail statically on the web. And right now, when you zoom in, the optimization will kind of wash out a lot of that detail. And I think it's going to be really important to really get across that quality that our merchants are looking for in presenting their models in a way that also kind of fits the performance envelope that we're trying to hit on the web. And I think there's also like a broader discussion here about what's kind of a standard way of handling this, both from content creation side of things, where how do you create various levels of detail that in together work to create kind of a cohesive streaming experience from like low to high res, but also how do we have a standard for the different renderers and viewers out there in the world to be able to load this data and then handle the streaming dynamically based on like camera position, based on bandwidth. So I think there's a lot of information there that can be standardized across kind of both creators and viewers using the content. It's funny because like when I think about this space, it definitely feels like the late 2000s era, where a lot of the thinking around video is happening for creating different video streaming codecs. Two big ones that came out from that era were like HLS and MPEG Dash. And just as an example here of what that kind of looks like on the right, you have kind of dynamically streamed video that can kind of toggle between different versions of a video, whether it's like low, medium, or high, based on the bandwidth available on kind of the client side. And this is a similar parallel. Well, what if we had a similar system for 3D where based on maybe it's the bandwidth constraints, maybe it's the camera positioning or something like that, that you're able to load in kind of the correct level of detail needed based on how further away you are, or how much bandwidth you have. So it'd be great to have like more dynamic system there. This kind of second area that I think is getting a lot of attention in the industry right now is this idea of trying to unify kind of the real time and offline 3D workflows that people are using. And when I look at this, when I think of this idea of unifying these two areas, it really comes down to increasing the return on investment for models that people are creating, right? 3D content creation, it's expensive, it's time consuming. And if the goal is to get more merchants using 3D content for the products they're selling today, right, we want to make sure that the models that they're getting created, they're going to be high value. They're going to get a lot of mileage from it, right? And we also want to recognize that not all 3D models are created equally, right? Sometimes you create very, very high quality models for photo renders for like visual effects scenarios, or you create dynamic, like kind of lower res models for real-time experiences, right? But ideally, our merchants would have their products modeled in like the highest fidelity possible. And then from that kind of single, like, I guess, true form of that product, you're able to generate all the different types of media that you need from that. And the first thing could be different levels of detail for real-time experiences. But you could also use those for generating photos, for generating videos, right? Once you have kind of a visual effects quality model, there's so much there's so many ways that you can reuse that content to produce, a variety of different types of media, right? That kind of stem from that. And it really comes down to maximizing that value. And it's funny because I mentioned earlier, some of our merchants, they're creating this content today already as part of their pipeline for when they design their products. But there's no like real great way to connect like the formats and data that those merchants are using right now on kind of the back office side of things into a way that can translate into product photos, into real-time models, into like videos, right? I mean, there's a lot of companies looking into this stuff, but how do we make this available on kind of a wider, broader scale? And I think like when we think of creating 3D models more valuable, the end result here is increased adoption, right? If models are more valuable to have, people are going to have more models to want to get made. The ecosystem will continue to grow. But there's also like another way of increasing the adoption of 3D models, and that's really trying to lower that barrier to getting the actual models made. And that's where I think a lot of the techniques, and I think there's been some discussions around this already today, but really great improvements in object scanning, right? And this is where you're looking at technology like photogrammetry, LiDAR scanners, generally just being able to scan a real world object in some way and capture it into some digital form. And it's been great to see like the resurgence of research and development in this area. Like for example, Apple recently announced or released the Object Capture API that's part of macOS Monterey, and that uses photogrammetry to create 3D models. So you can take a series of photographs and then send that to their API, and it will generate you a 3D model. There's a number of applications, right, that do this, and they either use like photogrammetry or a combination of LiDAR or other unique techniques. Just apps to name a few like Polycam, Turnio, Clone. And I think what's great is when the technology is good enough, object scanning would almost like provide merchants a self-service way to get their models made, right? They don't necessarily always need to reach out to a partner. But there obviously, there's merchants out there who are going to need that kind of hand-created model for that ultimate quality perspective. And I don't think that's what object scanning is for. But I think what object scanning allows merchants to do, especially smaller merchants who are just kind of getting into the space and might not have the resources to really get, large-scale model production ready, they can just experiment. They can just take their phone that they have, go through, scan, kind of take photos of their product for fun and get it on there and get kind of some of the benefits of 3D without really having to go through much effort. And once they see that value, then they can transition into getting higher qualities made. So it's really an on-ramp into kind of the 3D experience for commerce. And I think that's what's really exciting about techniques like object capture. But even when it's not good enough per se, object scanning can also provide a way to kind of shortcut model creation processes for modeling partners, right? Like if you're able to quickly scan a product and use that as kind of a base or a template for creating the real model on, it just shortens the amount of time that it takes to create those models. And it just allows, shorter times, a longer through or more throughput for models getting generated. And overall, we're generating more models, as a whole, whereas before there's a lot more manual process involved. So, I think the shortening of the time, the availability of technology and the devices that can support things like photogrammetry and LiDAR is going to really help increase the adoption of 3D content when it comes to e-commerce. Just kind of summarize like some of those points on kind of what we see and what we're excited about in the future is, today, the 3D of tomorrow, it gives the merchants a way to really express kind of every detail that they want their buyers to know about, right? Without needing to worry about performance or overhead needed to handle that, right? They don't need to worry about the format. They don't need to worry about, if I send you a really large file, it's going to properly render on my storefront. But also, I know that when the buyer is looking at it, they're not going to be looking at some degraded quality of it, right? They're able to see the true quality that the merchant wants to convey in that product. I think that the barriers to creating these high quality models, it's going to be seamless. It's going to be really easy. It'll be a frictionless experience, whether it's through things like object scanning, whether it's through just increased throughput on modeling partners. And just as the technology grows, model creation will just get easier and easier from here. And on top of the models being easy to create, it'd be great if there was the seamless workflow between real-time offline models, such that, when a merchant uploads a model, that's it, right? They don't have to worry about, do I have it for AR kit, or do I have it for VR, or do I have it for Snap or Instagram or any partner that they really want to publish a model on. They just know that, okay, I give you my model and it just works, and I know my buyers are going to get the best experience from it. And lastly, if we really think about creating high fidelity models from the onset, and we're able to have workflows that generate all this content, whether it's different levels of detail for various required platforms, or it's images or videos, what ends up happening is, because your model is really that kind of source of truth for kind of representing that product, real-time 3D becomes a really small part of kind of the 3D journey for that product, right? It's not just about having a real-time experience. It's really about representing your product as a whole in kind of its truest form, that you can then create all your branding, all your media, and tell your story from. And that's everything. Thanks. And you can reach me on Twitter at my name, or also email. And I always love talking about 3D stuff. So feel free to hit me up if you ever have any questions or want to chat. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephan, for the really interesting talk. And I think we have already 2 questions here in the Q&A section. And yeah, everyone feel free to ask more. We have some time to answer. So first one, I think you touched that topic already, but there's a very specific question in the end here saying, with Apple Object Capture, it seems like we're on the verge of expanding the number of 3D creators from having 1 to 2 million 3D artists, if you believe Autodesk stats, capable of photorealistic 3D, to 1 billion smartphone users. So how far are we from good enough quality user-generated content 3D?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the hard thing to answer there is, good enough is kind of a moving target based on kind of the merchant that you're talking about. So, some merchants, they're very particular. They want to make sure that every single detail is correct. In those cases, maybe photo scanning will never get to that point, or object scanning will never get to that point, right? They just really want that detail. But in some cases, maybe depending on the type of model that's being made, it's acceptable, it's good enough. And I think there's been a lot of improvements in photogrammetry that really help, I think, bring on kind of those merchants who are like, yeah, it's an easier model to capture. When I think of shoes or bags, they're matte surfaces. They're kind of, you're able to kind of fit a photo rig around them, in an easy way. They're kind of small, and for the most part, good enough for them is exactly that. It just works. But for larger merchants, if you're selling, highly metallic objects, maybe there's more technology there, and they're really particular about how those look. So it's kind of hard to say where we're at on that journey when everyone is good enough. But I think we're definitely covered maybe the first part of kind of the merchant audience and what they decide is good enough.
All right, thanks. Then another question here in the chat and the Q&A section is, what do you think of the GLTF MSFT lot extension? Because you were talking about LODs, right? So is it a good base for 3D content or the wrong direction?
Oh, so I have to admit, it's been a while since I've seen the Microsoft LOD extension. I do remember looking through it, and I can't offer any exact thoughts right now because it's been a bit hazy for me. But I think when maybe just to kind of dive into what would be a direction that I could see an LOD extension or something like that moving towards, it's definitely it might not necessarily encode all different streams of formats or data directly in the file. It might link out to external resources, for example, for different levels of quality, similar to something like HLS, right, where you have the different kind of playlist files. I could see, it being a reference to what you need to load at any given time. I don't know if maybe you need to include spatial information about kind of distance of camera, bandwidth limitations. I don't remember how that works for something like HLS, how it determines when to switch between different quality levels. And I don't know if that's a rule that you would need to encode in an extension like that. But yeah, I think you definitely need to have some sort of structure to link out to LODs. I think it would be nice to have a dynamic amount of LODs, right? Depending on how many levels you want to have. But then also maybe have properties of how do you transition between them? What are those rules like? Do you leave that up to the viewer? Do you encode that into the file so the creators can kind of have some control over how that content's being transitioned between LODs? I think that might be important to include in an extension like that. So, but yeah, as far as the Microsoft LOD, it's been a little while since I've seen the actual spec to really comment too strongly on it.
Right, thanks. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. And then, Pavel, do you have one? I saw you.
I have 3 points actually. So first would go about the client education. So because of course, we here are all aware of benefits of 3D, and it feels like right now with partners, it's actually not such a high entry threshold to get it. It's just you need to educate the clients. And to that point, we made very extensive research actually on the costs. Because everybody's saying, yeah, 3D is cheaper, 3D is better, yada, yada. But we made actually very concrete number-based research. And it turned out that, and it was across the globe, in terms of pricing, creating 3D content for e-commerce is 6 times cheaper than photo shoots. So with this number in place, and with your conversion rate increases, those two combined are very solid numbers, but do you do any clients outreach in the sense that you're trying to educate them that 3D is super valuable for you, but it's also actually just easier if you understand how to get it. You don't have to have know-how. You just need to partner up with you or whomever. And yeah, so that's my first question actually.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge because I think when we think of how do we educate merchants, there's different kind of segments. I think what we see is larger merchants understand the value, and they're usually reaching out and are just saying what are some ways I can incorporate 3D? Because I realize I can use it for a lot of things. We might be already using it for other things, and they're already educated. The smaller merchants, it's harder to kind of reach out to them and kind of convey to them the added value because when you're looking at, I guess this is kind of my opinion on it, but when a smaller merchant's looking at setting up a store or medium-sized merchant, right, they're already kind of worried about the cost of photos and videos, and they see 3D as a one more thing versus being oh, this is actually an alternative to images, right? Because if you were to tell them that, oh, instead of getting your photo shoot done, go get this model made, and it's actually going to save you a lot of money, that's just like something hard to kind of let them know, right? Because they're kind of working in like the today's world of, oh, I need photos, I need a photo shoot and that sort of thing. So it's definitely like a big hill to climb to really start telling people like, no, actually, if you go through this route. But I think there's also like that gap of like, okay, well, then I need to just like talk to more people to kind of get like the photo shoot done and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's definitely like a challenge. And as far as like, what are we doing today to kind of educate people? It depends on like the merchants that we're talking to. Like larger merchants, like I said, they're usually coming to us like asking questions, figuring out like, oh, what are the best ways of using 3D and how can I use it? Whereas smaller merchants, we're just trying to like get the word out and like try to inform people like, hey, like this is a really valuable option. You should do this. Like, look at these numbers, look at these conversion rates. But it can be difficult.
Okay, thanks. The next one is more on a technical note. Like you mentioned the LODs, so like the system we have in games. But do you actually like develop something in-house in this area, or is it like just a wish for the industry, or do you see it like some open source, collaborate effort from all of us? Like, what's the state here? Like, is it just wishful thinking for now, or do you actually like have something in mind, concrete that you want to do or you're doing in this area to like get there because you see this demand?
So there's nothing concrete in this area. I guess this is more of like a call out, be like, hey, this would be something that's I think is really valuable in the 3D commerce space. And I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. And I'd love to see like this be something that's part of, a standards body or some movement between like different parties. Because I think it's definitely one of those things where you need a lot of different voices at the table. You need like people who are creating the content. You need people who are rendering the content, and kind of get them in the same room and be like, hey, like this is probably a valuable thing that we can all agree on. What is like some way that we can get this in some sort of format? And I know there's like different options to getting that for, but this is kind of like hopefully planting a seed in the industry, be like, hey, this would be a really cool thing. And then, yeah, I'd be more than happy to talk more about this at length and dive into this in the future.
Sure, thanks. And the last one is more of a comment. Like, I just want to build up on what you said about photogrammetry, like the handheld. I'm not talking about professional scanners that were presented, because this is, of course, different use case. Because yeah, this like the scanners are industry, let's say, production ready product, right? And what user can do with their phone, it's just something to play around, essentially. But just to build up on what you said, that it can be a great reference, because like if we're about to model assets, right, we still need to get some reference images. And if you can, super quick, like in 2 minutes, just do the reference. Like it doesn't matter if you take a photo with your phone or if you do the like super quick scan, because you can at least get the proportions right. And it seems to be the most difficult challenge for the designers, especially if there's no cut drawings with dimensions, right? Actually, proportions of the asset are most challenging for some reason. So with this in place, like even if you just don't really care, like you do it in 30 seconds, it already gives you a nice reference point, right? So I just want to comment on that, or like build up on it. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I just a comment on your comment. I think it's a really powerful tool, right? Because even if you don't collect, like even if the photogrammetry doesn't capture like the exact details, right, of the textures, you're right. Like there's so much value in just getting the spatial information of something that you're trying to create by hand, right? Instead of having to kind of guess and figure out, oh, well, these like what's the relative scaling of this? How does this actually fit? Especially when you're designing products that are meant to be like used in augmented reality that have real world proportions. You want to make sure they're kind of correct, right? You might get like, a sheet saying the sizes, but you don't really know like what's the part of this, like how big is this part compared to this part. So yeah, I think scanning could be a great technique to help like, partners like yourself, just like, quickly get a capture, make that part of your flow. And then from there you can work on it a lot easier.
Yep.
All right. Any more questions, Pavel, from your end?
No, I said 3. It was 3. I'm fine. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, I think we have like one more in the chat. And it says like, forgive me in advance for using such an overhyped word, but one of the promises of the metaverse is a convergence of the things we do online, including shopping. Do you think about this much at Shopify?
Yeah, well, I guess the short answer, yes. We do think a lot about the metaverse. And I think the way that we think about it is, I think we see the metaverse, and I don't want to like be like a general comment for Shopify. This is more of like a personal opinion on this, but I think when it comes to 3D content, 3D content is like one of the kind of pillars of the metaverse, right? When we're talking about representing things online in possibly some three-dimensional space, the kind of lifeblood of that is 3D models, right? So if you want to transition merchants and people who are selling goods into some sort of virtual world, you have no choice but to have 3D content made for your goods. Like that's the only way you could represent that content, right? And I think like that's just like the fundamentals of getting like, how do we, if there's a metaverse world that opens up in like 10 years, whomever creates this digital world, there's going to be a transition from moving from traditional like 2D web into 3D web, and getting merchants 3D models is going to be like the top of that priority. And I think like the other kind of rule that we talk a lot internally is, when we talk about the kind of experience of shopping in the metaverse, right? A lot of people think of, the kind of traditional shopping mall, right? You walk into a mall and it's very much kind of skeuomorphic to the experience that we have today, right? You walk to a mall and you see a bunch of stores. But the saying, you might hear like someone like Daniel Beauchamp talk a lot about this, which is, wizards don't go to the mall. Right? If you're a wizard, you're not going to just walk through the aisles of a mall like, oh, that looks good, right? You have a lot of different abilities and powers, it's cool to say, that you could use in a virtual world, right? Is there like a different way of interacting at a fundamental level when it comes to shopping? And that's something that we think about too from like the buyer experience. So it's both like, how do we power our merchants to be ready for when something like a metaverse happens, to be on that platform? But also, how do we make sure that when buyers want to interact with our merchants for commerce, that experience isn't just like, hey, I'm walking to a store, cool, right? There's so much more you could do in that space. So that's kind of like some of our thinking.
Hey, thanks. Hope that answers the question. And there's one follow-up even now from Matt, our CEO, saying, since I've already crossed the line, I noticed that Shopify Plus has an NFT marketplace, and saying luxury brands have been quick to dive in and experiment in the space, including some of our customers. Should we be looking to Shopify as a serious NFT marketplace?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess, I don't want to say product direction is consider us a serious NFT marketplace. I don't know like what maybe you mean by that. But yes, we do have like a Shopify Plus, like I think it's an NFT beta program. So kind of larger merchants can opt into, if they were looking to sell or set up an NFT collection on Shopify, we have a way of kind of doing that today. It's very early days. Like it's something that I think we're experimenting with, that we're kind of looking into. And I think that's definitely going to have like some connotations for how, NFT, like, 3D is a type of content. A lot of people are associating non-fungible tokens with like images today. 3D can be something like that, videos or whatever kind of digital good you want to do. So I think there's definitely like some room there, and it's something that we're looking into. But yeah, I'm not really sure like beyond that point. But yeah, definitely keep it in your mind if you're thinking of NFTs.
All right, thanks. And then I think we're getting close to the break. I would maybe, if it's okay, I would have at least one more question. I could have more, but
yeah, no, of course.
And this is just like even leaving the realm of 3D for a second, but just to draw basically a comparison. Do you have an idea like of how, as of now, your merchants get their high quality product photos created, or videos? So let's say I own a skateboard store or whatever. Do I take pictures typically myself as the average Shopify merchant? If there is such a thing, like an average Shopify merchant, or do they usually use agencies for that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't know like too many of the answers for that about how we get like how kind of our merchants get photos made depending on where they get them made. I'm imagining they probably have to partner with people on the platform, whether it's through like the Experts Marketplace to find product photographers to do that, or they try to do something locally within their area. If they're larger companies, they probably have that system in-house in some way. So it really kind of depends on the merchant. But I don't have like any I guess factual ways I can tell you about how that, because I'm not really sure.